My brother slid the papers across the kitchen table like he was doing me a favor.
Not gently.
Not apologetically. He pushed them hard enough that they skidded across the wood and nearly fell off the edge in front of me. A pen landed beside them a second later, dropped from his hand like an afterthought.
Sign it, Marcus said.
Tonight. Before this gets worse. I looked at the documents. Then I looked at him. He was standing with his arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter in the house I grew up in the town I had left at 18 years old and never fully returned to. He was wearing a button-down shirt, the kind he wore when he wanted people to think he was important. His hair was combed back the way it always was when he had a meeting with someone he needed to impress. He had the look of a man who believed he had already won. I had seen that look before. Not on my brother specifically, but on certain kinds of people in certain kinds of rooms. People who mistake silence for weakness. People who confuse composure with surrender. People who assume that because you are not yelling, you must be afraid. I was not afraid, but I was very, very tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that builds over years. The kind that accumulates one dismissal at a time, one missed birthday at a time, one phone call that never came at a time. The kind that sits in your chest like sediment until something finally shifts it loose. I picked up the pen. I turned it over once in my fingers. Then I set it down. I'm not signing this, I said. Marcus exhaled sharply through his nose. Rachel.
No.
You don't understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing. He pushed off the counter and walked toward me. Not aggressively. Not yet. But with the energy of a man recalibrating, searching for a new angle. Marcus had always been good at that. Finding the angle, finding the leverage, finding the exact thing to say that made you feel like the ground was softer than you thought. Dad's name is on that company, he said. His voice had dropped lower.
Softer.
The performance of concern. If this goes sideways, it doesn't just hurt me. It hurts him. You understand that? Everything he built. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, Marcus, what Dad built, he built. What you did, you did. Those are two different things. He stared at me. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite guilt. Not quite anger. Something caught between the two. Just sign the paper, he said again. Quieter this time. Almost gentle. I stood up from the table. No, I said. And you should probably talk to a lawyer before Friday. Then I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, walked past him, and drove away in the dark. Let me go back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start in that kitchen. It starts about 22 years earlier, when I was 12 years old and Marcus was 17, and our father sat us both down in that same kitchen and told us something I never forgot. He said, in this family, we protect each other, no matter what. That's the only rule that matters. I believed him. I really did. I spent the next decade believing him. Marcus was 5 years older than me, which meant he got to do everything first. Everything was easier for him. Not because he was smarter or more talented, but because he was first. Parents are harder on the child who teaches them how to be parents. By the time I came along, they had already relaxed their grip. Already learned what to stop worrying about. Also, he was the son. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it is simply true, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. In our family, in our neighborhood, in the world we grew up in, sons occupied a certain kind of space. They were the ones people asked about at church on Sundays. They were the ones grandfather took fishing and talked to about the future. They were the ones who got the benefit of the doubt. I don't resent Marcus for being born first or for being a boy. What I resent is what he chose to do with the advantages that gave him. He chose, again and again, to let those advantages make him careless. When Marcus was 19, he borrowed $2,000 from our parents to start a car detailing business. The business lasted 4 months. Our parents never mentioned the money again. When I was 19, I got a full academic scholarship to a university 3 states away. My mother cried. My father asked if I had considered staying closer to home. When Marcus was 23, he got a DUI. My father hired a lawyer. My father never mentioned it again. When I was 23, I received my commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army after completing ROTC alongside my degree. I called home. My father said he was proud. Then he asked when I was planning to settle down. You see the pattern. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me.
I don't need that.
What I need is for you to understand the foundation. Because you cannot understand why that night in the kitchen happened or what came after it, unless you understand the 22 years that came before. I joined the Army because I wanted to matter somewhere. That sounds simple. Maybe it is. But there is something that happens to a person when they grow up in a house where their accomplishments are always somehow secondary, always somehow a footnote in someone else's story. You start to wonder if you are real. You start to need proof. The Army gave me proof. Not in a ceremony. Not in a promotion. In the small, daily, grinding way that genuine competence builds itself. I was good at what I did. My superiors knew I was good. My subordinates knew I was good. Eventually, after years of work, of deployment, of long nights and early mornings and decisions made in conditions that I will not fully describe here, the institution itself acknowledged it. I made major after 12 years. I worked in signals intelligence. I spent time at the Pentagon. I was involved in things I cannot discuss at the level of specificity people usually want. Back in Ohio, none of that registered. My father still introduced me to his friends as my daughter Rachel. She's in the military. Not my rank. Not my role.
Just a category.
Like saying she works with computers. Marcus, by this point, had started a logistics company. It was doing reasonably well for a few years. He had 10 employees. He had a small warehouse outside of Columbus. He had a truck with the company name on the side. He drove that truck to church sometimes on Sundays, and my father talked about it like Marcus had built the Panama Canal. I said nothing. I came home when I could. I called when I remembered. I stayed in my lane. That was my mistake, maybe. Staying in my lane while Marcus quietly drifted out of his. I found out what my brother had been doing 3 days before that night in the kitchen. I was in Virginia, sitting in my apartment after a long day, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually, I don't answer those.
I don't know why I answered that one.
The woman on the other end identified herself as a special agent with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. She asked if I was Major Rachel Holloway. I said yes. She asked if I had any involvement with a company called Holloway Freight Solutions, LLC, operated by a Marcus Holloway out of Columbus, Ohio. I told her that Marcus was my brother, and that beyond that, no, I had no involvement with his company. She paused. Then she said that my name had appeared on several federal procurement documents submitted by Holloway Freight Solutions. She said the documents indicated that I had personally reviewed and endorsed the company for preferred vendor status with the Department of Defense subcontractor. I had never done that. She said they were aware of that. She said the signatures appeared to have been forged. I sat very still in my apartment for a long moment. Then I asked her what I should do. She told me to preserve everything, to speak to no one about the call, and to expect further contact. She said I was not the subject of the investigation. She said I was a victim.
Victim.
The word felt strange. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I had spent 12 years in a profession that did not use that word often. We used other words. We talked about exposure, liability, risk. We talked about the situation, not about being a victim. After the call, I sat there for a long time. I thought about the last time I had spoken to Marcus. It had been about 6 weeks earlier. He had called me, which was unusual. He had been chipper, almost aggressively upbeat. He had asked how things were going at the Pentagon. He had asked if I was still doing the important stuff. He had laughed at his own joke. At the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, he had asked whether I ever did any consulting work for private contractors. I had said no. He had said, sure, of course, just asking. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Now I thought of everything. I opened my laptop and started pulling together what I could from memory. I had never signed anything for Marcus. Never submitted anything. Never reviewed any of his procurement attempts. But he had my full name. He had my rank. He had seen my business card once, years ago, at a family event. He had photographs of me in uniform from my mother's Facebook page. That was apparently enough. I made notes. I organized them by date. Then I called a colleague who had experience with these kinds of cases and asked for advice. She gave it to me without asking too many questions. That is the thing about people who have worked in intelligence for a long time. They understand when questions should stop. 3 days later, I drove home to Ohio.
Not because Marcus had asked me to.
Not because my parents had called. Because I needed to look at my brother and understand exactly how far this had gone before anyone else did. My mother met me at the door with a hug that lasted a little too long. She always did that when she was nervous. She would hold on slightly past the point of natural, and you could feel in her arms that she was bracing for something. "It's so good you came," she said into my shoulder. "Is Marcus here?"
I asked.
A small pause. "He's coming for dinner." Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and furniture polish. The same combination it had always smelled like, the same combination it would probably smell like until the walls themselves gave out. Some things about home never change. That can be comforting or it can be suffocating, depending on the day. My father was in the living room watching television. He looked up when I walked in and smiled with the genuine warmth of a man who loved his daughter and also had no real idea who she was.
"There she is," he said.
"How's Washington?" "Virginia," I said. "I'm in Virginia, Dad." Right. Same area, though." I sat down across from him. For a moment, I just looked at his face. He was older than the last time I had seen him in person. Not dramatically, just in the small ways that people age when you see them rarely enough to notice the accumulation. His hairline had moved. His eyes had deepened around the corners. He was a good man. I believed that. I had always believed that. Good men could still build systems that hurt people without ever intending to. They could love their daughters and still treat them as afterthoughts. They could protect their sons and call it loyalty. "Dad," I said, "has Marcus talked to you about his business lately?" He muted the television. "What do you mean?" "How is it doing?" "The freight company." He shrugged. "He said there's been some cash flow issues. But he's handling it." "What does handling it mean?" My father looked at me more carefully now. "Why are you asking?" Before I could answer, the front door opened and Marcus walked in. He saw me immediately. His face went through 3 expressions in about half a second.
Surprise.
Calculation. Then the version of warmth he kept for public occasions. "Hey, Ratch." He walked over and hugged me. "Didn't know you were coming." "Surprise," I said. Over his shoulder, I watched his jaw tighten by exactly 1 degree. Dinner was the kind of meal where everyone is performing normalcy with the focus of a stage actor. My mother passed the pot roast. My father talked about his neighbor's new fence. Marcus told a story about a client that went on 3 minutes too long. I ate and watched and said very little. After dinner, while my mother was cleaning up and my father had drifted back to the television, Marcus found me in the kitchen. He closed the door behind him. "I need to talk to you," he said. I figured. "I have a situation." I waited. He sat down at the table. He folded his hands on the surface in a way that was clearly rehearsed, meant to look humble, meant to signal that what followed should be received as an honest confession rather than what it actually was, which was a tactical retreat. "Some contracts I submitted had some documentation issues," he said. "Documentation issues," I repeated. "The government does audits. It's normal. I just need to get ahead of it." "Marcus, there are some forms that went out that had your name on them. I want to explain that." "Please," I said. "Explain." He explained. It took about 15 minutes. The version he told was the most charitable possible interpretation of events, the one in which he had made an understandable mistake under pressure, in which his intentions had always been good, in which the only real problem was some paperwork that needed to be corrected, and in which what he needed from me was simply to sign a document that would, in his words, clarify the record and allow the situation to be resolved quietly. The document, which he produced from a folder he had apparently brought with him for this exact purpose, was a retroactive authorization. It would establish that I had, in fact, endorsed his company's qualifications for federal contracting. It would make the fraudulent submissions look legitimate. It would put my name on something I had never agreed to, something I still did not agree to, and it would do so in a way that might satisfy an initial review. What it would actually do, if anyone looked more carefully, was implicate me in the fraud alongside him. He finished explaining. He slid the paper across the table. He put the pen beside it.
Sign it, he said.
Tonight. Before this gets worse. I looked at the documents. I looked at him. I thought about 12 years. About deployments. About a career built with both hands in the dark. About the phone call 3 days ago. About the agent's voice. About the word victim. I picked up the pen. I turned it over once. Then I set it down.
I'm not signing this, I said.
I spent that night in my old bedroom, which my mother had converted into a guest room with a level of decorating enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting for an excuse. There were throw pillows. There was a scented candle. There was a small watercolor print of a lighthouse on the wall. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. The thing about a situation like this, when someone you grew up with does something like what Marcus had done, is that you have to make peace with several things at once. You have to accept that the person in front of you is capable of something you did not think they were capable of. You have to accept that your own name, your rank, the career you built, has been picked up and used without your knowledge or consent. You have to accept that the institution you serve, the one that has required sacrifice after sacrifice from you across more than a decade, could now look at you with suspicion. And you have to decide what to do about it. Some people would have signed the paper. I understand that. Genuinely. The pull of family is a real thing. The desire to contain damage, to protect a father from embarrassment, to keep a household from imploding, those are not small forces. People make enormous sacrifices to preserve family stability. People absorb incredible amounts of injustice to keep a roof from coming down. I had absorbed a fair amount myself over the years. But there is a line. Not a dramatic line. Not a line with flags and trumpets. Just a quiet line that you cross in your mind in a dark room on a Tuesday night, and after you cross it, you cannot uncross it. The line, for me, was this. I had given my career everything. Every year since I was 18 years old, I had poured my energy and my health and my time into building something real. I had done it while my family barely noticed. I had done it while Marcus got the truck with his name on it and the applause at Sunday dinner and the softness of being the first child, the son, the one who mattered in the way that sons mattered. I was not going to let him take my name and my rank and put them on his fraud. I was not going to sign a document that made me complicit in something I had nothing to do with. I was not going to protect him by destroying myself. That was the line. After I crossed it in my mind, I felt very calm. I picked up my phone and sent a message to the investigator. I told her I was in Ohio, that I had seen my brother, that he had attempted to get me to sign a retroactive authorization, and that I had declined. I told her I was prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation and that I would be available for whatever is needed. She replied within 40 minutes, which told me they were further along than she had initially let on. She said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't discuss this with anyone else in the family." She said, "We will be in touch very soon." I put the phone down. I looked at the lighthouse on the wall. Then I slept better than I had in weeks. The next 2 days in that house were among the strangest of my life. Marcus came back the following morning. He was tense but controlled, the way people are when they are trying to appear casual and not quite managing it. He made coffee. He talked about football. He did not mention the papers again. My parents moved around him with the particular kind of careful affection families use when they know something is wrong and have collectively decided not to say so. My mother made too much food. My father watched too much television. The weather outside was gray and cold in the way that Ohio in late autumn can be, the sky the color of old pewter, the trees stripped down to their structure. I helped my mother with things around the house. I fixed a cabinet hinge that had been loose for apparently several years. I sat with my father and watched a game I did not care about. I was present, and I was calm, and I was, in the way I had learned to be across a very long career, unreadable. On the second day, Marcus found me alone in the backyard in the afternoon. He sat down in one of the old lawn chairs that had been out there since I was a teenager. He did not look at me right away. He looked out at the yard, at the fence, at the dead garden my mother maintained with tremendous effort every spring, and which now looked like it was simply resting. You're not going to sign, he said. Not a question. No, I said. You know what happens if this goes forward. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Dad's name is attached to some of this. His personal guarantee on the business loans. I had not known that. I felt it land in my chest, but I kept my face the same. That wasn't your call to make, I said. Involving his name. Same as it wasn't your call to involve mine. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. For a moment, he looked less like my brother, and more like someone I might have passed on the street without recognizing. Older. More worn. The gap between who he had believed he was and who he actually turned out to be was visible in his face in a way it hadn't been the day before. I was trying to keep the business alive, he said. I know. You don't know what it's like. You've always had the government behind you. Steady pay, steady promotions. I've been out there actually trying to build something. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I thought about what it would take to say what I wanted to say. I thought about how easy it would be. I thought about 12 years of deployments and early mornings and decisions made in conditions that would make him physically ill to hear described. I thought about every dinner where his business was discussed for 45 minutes and someone remembered to ask about me for 90 seconds at the end. I thought about steady pay and steady promotions and what those words actually mean to someone who has earned them 1 year at a time in places people would rather not think about. But I didn't say any of that. Because some things you say, and some things you keep. And the ones you keep are not the ones you're afraid of. They're the ones that don't need to be said out loud to be true. Marcus, I said, talk to a lawyer.
Today.
Before Friday.
He looked at me.
Why Friday? Just talk to a lawyer. He stared at me for another moment. Then he stood up from the lawn chair. He went inside without saying anything else. I sat outside for another hour. The sky went from gray to dark gray to the kind of deep blue gray that comes just before actual dark. The air smelled like dead leaves and cold, and somewhere nearby someone was burning something in a fireplace. I thought about my grandfather on my mother's side who had also been in the military a long time ago, a different war, a different world. He used to say that the most dangerous moment in any situation was the moment right before the resolution. Because that was when people did the things they couldn't take back. I hoped Marcus would talk to a lawyer. I didn't think he would. Friday came. I had told my mother I was staying through the weekend. She was pleased. She made plans for Sunday dinner. She asked if I wanted to see any of her friends from church. She was operating in a reality that was about to change and she didn't know it and I couldn't tell her, and that was the part that sat the heaviest. Marcus did not come by Thursday. Did not call. Friday morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habit. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen while the neighborhood was still dark outside the window. I sat at the same table where Marcus had pushed those papers across at me. I sat in the same chair. I drank the coffee. At 9 in the morning, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Then another. My mother came out of the hallway, tying her robe, looking at me with the beginning of confusion on her face. Are you expecting someone? Not exactly, I said. I got up and walked to the front door. 2 people stood on the porch. A man and a woman, both in dark coats. Behind them, parked at the curb, were 2 vehicles. Not marked, but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. The woman held up identification. She was the agent who had called me 8 days earlier. In person, she looked exactly as she had sounded. Precise, professional, completely unhurried. Major Holloway, she said.
Good morning, I said.
Is Marcus Holloway here?
No.
But I can give you his address. My mother appeared in the hallway behind me. I heard her sharp intake of breath when she saw the badge. The agent looked past me, briefly, and then back at me. Thank you for your cooperation throughout this process, she said. It was a formal thing to say, but she said it with enough directness that I understood she meant it. He should have talked to a lawyer, I said.
He did, she said.
Yesterday. The lawyer called us this morning. I nodded. She handed me a card. We'll need a formal statement at some point. Nothing urgent. You can contact my office to schedule. I'll do that. She nodded. They went back down the porch steps. They got in the vehicles. They drove away. I stood in the open doorway for a moment, feeling the cold air on my face. Behind me, my mother said my name. Just my name. Quietly. I turned around. She was standing in the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself, and her eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask yet. She looked very small suddenly. Not fragile, just small. The way people look when a version of reality they had been maintaining collapses. I went to her. I put my arms around her. "It's going to be okay," I said. "What happened?" she said into my shoulder. "What did Marcus do?" "I'll explain everything," I said. "Let's sit down." We sat at the kitchen table. I told her as much as I could. I was honest where honesty was appropriate and careful where it wasn't. I did not perform. I did not dramatize. I gave her the information she needed in the order that would make it most possible to absorb.
She cried. Of course she did.
Not because she was weak, but because it is a human thing to cry when the picture you have of someone you love turns out to be incomplete. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He could have just asked you for help." "Yes," I said. "He could have." "Would you have?" I thought about it. Honestly thought about it. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. If he'd asked before he started forging my name on federal documents." She almost laughed at that. Almost. My father came downstairs an hour later. He looked between us and understood immediately that something had happened.
He sat down.
My mother took his hand. I told him.
He was very still while I talked.
He did not interrupt. He did not try to find the angle that made Marcus look better. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "You don't have to apologize for what Marcus did." "I'm not apologizing for that," he said. He met my eyes. "I'm apologizing for other things." I did not ask him to specify. Neither of us needed that. Some conversations happen without the details. The shape of the thing is enough. He knew what he was sorry for, and I knew what I wished had been different, and we sat with that between us at the kitchen table while the morning light came through the window and made everything look almost gentle. The investigation took several months. Federal cases always do. There is a rhythm to them that civilians find maddening. The long silences, the sudden requests for documentation, the formal language that drains urgency from everything, the sense that something enormous is moving very slowly and there is nothing to do but wait. Marcus hired an attorney. Not a good one initially, then a better one. He tried several approaches. He questioned the authenticity of the procurement documents. He suggested that there had been confusion, miscommunication, a clerical error on a significant scale. He tried, at one point, to suggest that I had given him some form of informal verbal authorization that he had then reasonably documented. That last one went nowhere. By the time it was resolved, the picture that emerged from the investigation was not dramatic. It was just sad, the way most human failures are when you see them fully. Marcus had been struggling financially for years. His company had been bleeding money through a combination of poor management, bad contracts, and his own consistent refusal to acknowledge that a business that is not working is a business that needs to change. Rather than restructure, rather than downsize, rather than do the difficult and humiliating thing of admitting failure and starting smaller, he had started borrowing. And when borrowing stopped working, he had started misrepresenting. And when that wasn't enough, he had started building a fiction around my name, my rank, my career. Using me the way people use a photograph of someone else on a fake social media profile. Something that looks real enough to work at a glance. He accepted a plea agreement. I will not go into the details of the terms because they are not really the point of the story. The point is that the consequences arrived. And they were real. And they changed his life significantly in ways that will take years to finish changing. My father's name was removed from the business liability after a review of the records. The personal guarantee was found to have been improperly documented, and the exposure was substantially less than Marcus had implied to me in the backyard. That was some comfort. My name appeared in the final investigative report as a victim of identity misuse. Reading that word in a government document felt different from hearing it on the phone. More real. More settled. Like something had been confirmed that I already knew, but needed to see in print. I gave my formal statement in a conference room in a federal building in Columbus on a morning in January. The investigator, the woman from the porch, sat across from me. We were professional with each other. We were thorough. Afterward, She walked me out to the elevator and said, almost conversationally, that she didn't see many cases where the person whose name had been used was also the one who cooperated most effectively with the investigation. I told her that made some sense, given the circumstances. She said it took a certain kind of character. I thought about that word, character. I thought about where character comes from, whether it is something you are born with, or something that is made in you by the years, by the deployments, by the long nights and the decisions and the slowly accumulating understanding that the world does not grade on a curve, that consequences are real, that the things you do with your name matter because your name is the only thing that is entirely yours. I thanked her. I walked to my car. I drove back to Virginia. About 6 months after everything resolved, I drove back to Ohio. Not for any particular reason. Not for a crisis. Just to visit. My mother had planted the garden again. It was doing well. My father and I sat on the back porch on a Saturday afternoon and drank coffee and watched the light change across the yard. We talked about some things and were quiet about others. The specific texture of that afternoon is not something I can fully describe because some things exist only in the experience of them. At some point he said, I used to think Marcus was the strong one. I looked at him. I didn't say anything. Because he was loud about things, my father said. He was always so sure. Made it seem like he had it figured out. I nodded slightly. You were always quieter, he said. I think I misread that. I looked out at the garden for a moment. At the things growing. You did, I said. But it's okay. He nodded. We drank our coffee. When did you know? He asked. That night with the papers. When you decided not to sign. Did you know then what was going to happen? I thought about it honestly. I knew something was going to happen, I said. I didn't know what shape it would take. I just knew that I had spent 12 years building something real. And I wasn't going to sign my name to something that wasn't. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I should have come to your promotion ceremony. He meant a specific one. I did not ask which one. I knew which one. The one where I had stood in a room with other people's families and accepted something I had worked years for and called my supervisor to say congratulations afterward because there was no one else to call. Yeah, I said. You should have. He nodded. He did not make excuses. That was the most important part. He just sat with it. We stayed on that porch until the light was completely gone and the air had turned cold enough that we had to go inside. My mother made dinner. We ate it at the kitchen table. The same table where the papers had been pushed across at me. The same chairs. The same window. Different though. Something in it different. I drove back to Virginia the next morning. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The highway was almost empty. I drove with the window cracked and the cold air coming in and the radio off, and I thought about character, about what it costs, about what it is made of. About the years before anyone noticed. About the years that count anyway. There is a particular loneliness in being the person that everyone assumes does not need anything. The strong one. The capable one. The one who is fine. People stop offering you things.
They stop asking.
They redirect their softness toward whoever seems to need it more. And you get very good over time at not seeming to need things. Because that is what survival requires. But here is what I want to say to anyone who recognizes themselves in any part of this. The years that nobody saw still counted. Every single one of them. The promotions that happened without family in the room. The decisions made without anyone to call afterward. The deployments and the early mornings and the long stretches of doing what was right when doing what was wrong would have been so much easier. None of it disappeared because no one was watching. It was all real. It is all real. And when the moment came, when someone slid papers across a table and asked me to put my name on a lie, those years were the thing that held. Not the ceremonies. Not the rank. Not the applause that never quite came. The years. The quiet, accumulating, uncelebrated years. Those were the thing that held. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If you have ever been the person in your family who is expected to hold things together while being treated as less than those who couldn't, I hope some part of this story reached you. And if you stayed until the end, thank you. Thank you for listening.